episode of the Restoration Today podcast is brought to you by Wylander. Stressed about hiring and recruiting? Tired of outsourcing hiring needs to companies that just don't get it? It's time to discover the recruitment process that will change your company. Wylander's team of recruiters understands the restoration industry and partners with companies across the U.S., filling hundreds of full-time positions every year. The Wylander process is transparent, proven, and cost-effective. Learn more at wylander.com. Hello out there, restorers. Thank you for checking out this episode of the Restoration Today podcast. Today, I'm excited to be joined by two friends in the industry. They have been here before, and I have been on their podcast. I am very excited to be joined by Reece and Chris Nordyke from Floodlight Consulting Group, and they have been growing a lot in the industry, just as I have been over the last year. They've been in the industry for a while in different capacities in different restoration companies, and are now out on their own with their own consulting group. And so I'm excited to just catch up. See what's up. I've been hearing your name more and more. You have your Head, Heart, and Boots podcast, and you've been traveling around doing some consulting and training and helped me build some good relationships within the last year, which I appreciate. So thank you very much for joining me. Chris, I'm going to have you kind of introduce yourself and share your background first.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, we're excited to be here. Thank you. I was just listening, by the way, to your interview with Turk last night. It was so good. As I said, that's what he goes by, right?
Yes, it
Turk?
is.
That was awesome.
Mike is wonderful.
Oh my gosh, that was a great.
And they're building something, monstrous.
Yeah. Anyways, for those of you who haven't heard that episode, you got to check it out. The interview with the CEO of Mammoth was really great. So anyway, Chris Nordyke. So I have kind of an eclectic background. So like my early days, I first got into business selling Cutco knives to all of my parents' friends at church. And that earned me an opportunity to get into their branch manager training program. And so I sold a lot of knives to housewives and couples and stuff like that. Ended up running a sales office for Cutco, moved down to LA when I was 20 years old with a bunch of used office furniture, hired my first receptionist, negotiated my first office lease when the same month I turned 20. It was a crash course
in
business.
Loose use
Yeah, it was crazy. It was just crazy. So that got my start. That was like my first experience with sales, with owning a business, all the things. And it was an incredible training ground. And I parlayed that into, I owned a Rapid Refill Inc. franchise. Okay. This was back in the day, like the gold rush of HP ink cartridges cost a fortune. Nobody wants to pay $50 for an ink cartridge. So we were selling remanufactured ones for $17 or something. So I started that business with a buddy. The main career thrust, though, I spent almost 8 years with State Farm. 5 of those years owning my own agency, and I had a team of 5 employees, and we had a very successful agency. But ultimately, decided I wanted to. I thought I wanted to venture out in consulting and get into technology, and I was young enough that I knew I had time to hit reset, And so I left the insurance business, tried my hand at an iPhone app startup. A handful of different things. But that led me actually to the restoration industry. So a year or two into that consulting stint, an old childhood friend, used to be the cool older, teenager, would go on the youth group trips to the lake. He just bought a restoration company and said, "Hey, Chris, do you do any marketing or sales consulting?" And I said, "Well, it just so happens I do."
Today I do.
And anyway, so that led me into restoration. And I spent, that was how Brandon and I met each other. And I had a stint at Belfour on their national sales team, which is really intentional. Brandon and I both wanted to see how Belfour operates. And it was very impressive in a lot of ways, and learned a lot of things. And we decided, hey, now or never, one of those moments of truth. We're like, okay, this is the perfect time. Let's branch out and start our own thing. So
what is it about some people in youth group? I mean, I remember growing up that way too. And there was always that really cool few kids up at the top, like, man, I want to be them when I grow up. They're so cool and have it all together. It's like high school all over again in youth group, and you're doing it twice.
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah. This guy was like 19, and his girlfriend, who's now his wife, was like 17, and I was 15. And so he was the cool older boyfriend of a youth group member that was like, had his own boat, and so, yeah, no, it's funny how that goes. Everybody has the cool kid in youth group. They want to be like.
Okay, Brandon, your turn.
Okay. So I don't know, the long and short of it, because nobody really cares, right? Is
yes, they do. That's why she asked.
we just did.
They do, because how are they going to trust you as a consultant if they're like, where did these two come from? They're both bald. They have weird facial hair.
Right. It's really just trust the lack of hair. That should tell you that we've learned something along the way, and the stress depleted our ability to have flowing locks. But I don't know. I got into this industry. It's been close to 12 years now, maybe a little bit more. And I have a military and construction background. That's kind of where things started for me. And I got introduced to this industry and really was offered and participated in a really neat opportunity where I got to spend close to 10 years building something from the ground up. And when you're not the owner, that is a rare opportunity. So I've been really fortunate and blessed, and that gave me a platform where I could just fill every leadership role that a company tends to have, because it's like when you push and help grow something, there's going to be the opportunity then to take the next seat up. And I just was fortunate, and I did that. And so I spent the majority of my time in operations, developing people, creating leadership teams, and helping develop kind of the service delivery model and those processes and stuff. So it was a great deal of fun. I actually kind of fact is I appreciate and admire process and procedure. I know the value of it. We certainly help people introduce it to their businesses, but I actually geek out on the development of people more than anything else. It was like I needed to learn the other skill set to provide a now value, but really what I've loved is just helping people grow, and it's happened to be in this industry for a long time. So, anyways, that's kind of how we got into it. Chris and I, now we've known each other we're pushing 8 or 9 years.
Facebook told us a month or so ago.
Yeah, we got a reminder.
You've been together for 8 years.
Yes. It's like, oh, okay. Well, time flies. Yeah.
So what has the last year been like? Okay, I'm curious for each of you to throw out one lesson you've learned from the last year.
Oh, wow.
This adventure.
Oh man, that's good. You got one ready?
No, but you're both looking to the side.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, and this is not, we always love to share those things that are sort of like lessons learned and they're in the past, because then we don't feel as, small when we talk about them. But this is a growing edge for me. So we use the core values index, which I don't know, it's kind of a lesser known version of DISC or Enneagram, that kind of stuff. Yep. And I'm a very high merchant. Merchants are starters. They're not maintainers. Merchants are anchored in relationship. Like they're very driven by relationship and reputation and all that kind of stuff. And one of the dark side of the merchant is we tend to avoid conflict because we're so rooted in building and maintaining relationships that we tend to shy away from saying the hard things that could rub somebody the wrong way, but need to be said. Mm-hmm. And I think as I've taken on this consultant role, where that's a lot of what people are paying us for, is to say, hey, whoa. Let's talk about a different way of doing that or saying that, or, et cetera. Those difficult conversations are what people pay us for. Right. So that's been an uncomfortable growth area for me. And I've also recognized too, that I think it hampered some of my leadership earlier in my career. Sure. Just this anchoring in relationship, but without the necessary self-awareness to be able to shift gears and engage in those difficult conversations. So that's been a huge growing area for me over the last year. Just recognizing it has been helpful to start to flex that muscle a lot more with clients. It's easier for Brandon. Yeah, Brandon's, I don't know, it's a military background, being a paratrooper. Like he's able to just jump right into those hard conversations sometimes in a way that it's more work for me. I have to really discipline myself to engage that at that level.
So what's your DISC profile then?
So I am an ID, if I remember. It's been a while since I've taken it, right? So that's the more extroverted but driven, right? Kind of. Anyway, whereas I think Brandon's probably a DI.
I am. Which one is it? Which test did you just say?
The DISC.
The DISC. I don't remember. I don't know where
he's a hardcore driver.
I know I'm like an 8 on the Enneagram, which is basically you border between asshole and driven. So that's I don't know if I can say that word, but so that's where I
I'm
fall.
sorry. Did we just make this explicit rating in Spotify?
No, I am too. And I was, the first time I did my Enneagram, I was like mortified that that's what I was. I was like, oh my God.
Are you an 8?
Yes.
Oh, you
That's
are.
rad.
Okay.
That's rad. You know what? At the beginning, it was hard for me. I fell in 2 camps at the same time. One is what, like, damn right. Like, yeah, I'm not no soft number. I'm an 8. But then the other thing, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like misunderstood all the time because I'm a loyalist. I'm just doing it for you, all the things. So anyways,
I get mad because I love you.
Yeah. It's anger out of love. It's for your best interest. So anyways, I've figured it out. How about you? Have you become more open to adopting that as your number?
I try very hard to cover that up because I very much am a people pleaser and I want people to like me. I think especially in the position that I am.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I try to be really nice all the time. I come to talk to you both.
That's so funny.
Yeah, no, I get it. I do feel like I've spent a number of years kind of trying to overcompensate for some of that default wiring, which has been good. I mean, it's been wise. It's helped me be able to connect with a wider group of people, I think, because I can keep some of that in a more healthy check. But I am becoming more and more emboldened by that 8 status, and I don't shy away from it quite as much anymore. I think as far as like kind of a lesson thing from this year, I think the biggest thing for me is, in fact, Chris and I were just talking about it this morning, that we've definitely have found like some new layers of disciplines and things that were required for us to do the initial lift of getting this company off the ground and some of the adventures that we're in the midst of right now. But I've also realized that mentally I have some weaknesses that I don't think I recognized until we started doing our own thing. Like I just, whether it be I was surrounded by a big enough team to make up for it that I didn't see it as clearly. But there's some mental weaknesses, and I've realized this year that there's been gains that have been made for certain, but I still have the horizons out there a ways on some things that I'm going to have to continue to develop to continue to grow a business and be able to, offer the kind of the highest value that we can to our relationships. So I think that's where I'm at.
Double click on that, dude. What do you mean? What do you mean by mental weakness?
Well,
Illustrate that a little bit.
Yeah, maybe. Let's see. What's a good example?
I love it when I'm not asking the questions.
Right. Is it? Yeah.
Would you like me to start with a few that I've observed? No.
Yeah. Could you dime me out? That would be excellent. I don't know. One of the things I think we were talking about this morning is just like how we use our day. In fact, this might be a really great kind of like what we were touching on earlier, Michelle, is I get to a certain point in my day. And when I'm listening to like Ed Milet and, Tim Ferriss and all the people that they have on their show, I'm going, dude, these guys are throwing in 18 hours a day. Like they have, Ed Milet's claim to fame is he has 3 days in one day and he breaks them up into these cycles. Right. And I'm going, dude, by 7 o'clock, I just don't want to be thinking about work. Like I want to take some time to not process all the woulda, coulda, and shoulda. And I just can't tell if that's good or if it's weakness. So I don't know if that's a good example. So I'm just like wrestling with that. How about you? Like, I mean,
I wrestle with that too. I'm a really good, everybody has these hours when you're most efficient, right? And so you kind of have to learn that, like, are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon? Are you an evening person? And so for me, I know that my most efficient hours are between like 6:30 a.m. and noon, right? And then early afternoon, I might get like a few emails returned, like that kind of stuff, but I'm probably not doing anything super crazy. But then I reactivate after my kids go to bed. So that is actually a fruitful time for me, even though I'm usually in bed it depends on the night, like midnight, 11. I'm going to say 11 because my husband's going to edit this and he's going to be like, you're full of crap going on.
Built-in fact checker.
Unless like there's like 2 nights a week where they can be really, really late nights, but other than that, it's not that late. But anyway, finding those efficiency hours has been key. And I think I agree with that like, is it a strength or a weakness? Because I find too that I tend to give myself sometimes the grace of like, all right, I know I have this to-do list, but I'm really feeling done right now. And how effective am I really going to be? And how good am I going to be at it if I'm forcing myself to do it? Whereas if I wait and I know that I'm going to be motivated later tonight or tomorrow morning, I can get that done in a better way.
Yeah.
Faster tomorrow. So don't force sometimes stuff has to get done, but I also try to give myself that grace of like, you're going to get it done. It's going to be, but then I really stress out too. So I don't know.
It's right. Well, you just summarized like how I feel about it most of the time. It's like, sometimes I'm in this camp and I'm like, I've got a direction and I'm very clear on, what, this is a superpower. It is what it is. I'm super aware of it. It's great. And then the, next day I'm like, yeah, but this person does this. I have to say, and this is not blowing smoke, but I just admire what you're doing, because the reality of it is, and we actually talked about this when you were on the show, you're building a company right now. Like for folks that maybe haven't quite put two and two together, what you're doing is a really hard lift. Just as hard as any of us, doing a restoration company or some other kind of business, and maybe if not harder. And so that's impressive in and of itself. But then on top of that, you're a mom with young kids. Like we were saying this earlier, my kids are old, man. I have a 20 and a 22-year-old. Well, I don't know how you do a parenting shift in the middle of your day and then turn that off and become productive again after you've given that energy to your family. Like, that is so impressive to me. That's part of it's your fault, actually, Michelle, why I feel weak is because you can do something like that. And I'm like, I don't think I could. I don't know. I haven't had to in so long. I don't know if I could.
You could. And it's not, the people around me would tell you that I'm normally a crazy person. And so this is something that I've really had to focus on. And I've lost time with friends. I've had to reprioritize, probably like you guys have, where like, I used to spend more time with my girlfriends. I used to have more free time. And now I've more chosen my companies. My friends are still important to me and I still see them often, just not as much. But my boys are important to me, and I'm done working, in time to pick up my son at 3 p.m. most days. And it's finding a balance, right? But Chris, you share like heartfelt stories of these lessons that you learn with your kids while you're out on these walks and these hikes. I'm like, wow, you really are like deep.
Well,
in there.
Well, it's funny. Like, yes, I do have those moments, and of course they're really great for Facebook, so everybody can know how thoughtful and how reflective I am and how wise and sage. And the reality is the last forest walk we did was probably 6 or 8 weeks ago. So no, I mean, and that is the tug of war. It's like, I wrestle with the same, questions I think all of us do, is like, am I pushing hard enough? Like, am I getting the most out of myself and my days? And then on the other hand, I was sharing with Brandon, I'm like, I'm really happy right now. Like, I have, like, in general, Brandon and I have really tried to discipline ourselves to where at 5 o'clock, unless we have a really pressing deadline, we really try to shut it off and not just consume ourselves nonstop with the business. Because when you're starting a business, it's like you could just spend all the time.
Yes.
Every minute.
And I'm so grateful for that. And we're really lucky. I mean, we've been so fortunate with client load and just everything for our business, to where we haven't maybe had to burn ourselves out the way I think some, owners feel a pressure to. I don't know. I just feel so lucky, and I feel like happy, like, because I do have kind of that balance right now, but it is a tug of war. It's like, I feel like what could I do if I discipline myself and focus myself even harder? Could I get more out of this, of what I've been given? And I don't know, maybe that's just a normal tug of war all kind of entrepreneurial people feel, is, could I do more? Yeah, probably. And I also really love my life at the moment too. And that's worth something, because I have a 16-year-old, 13-year-old, and 10-year-old.
Yep.
And my wife is an operating room nurse, and she works a couple days a week to keep her license current and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, boy, as a married couple, it takes a lot of effort when you have kids to stay connected as a married couple. And I'm not just talking about sex, but I am also talking about sex, right? All the things, like to create date nights, to just have times where you're talking aside from talking about the kids.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like just to create space and room to live your life.
Yep.
Because however cool of a car you have and big house you have and how much money you have in the bank and in your investments, it's like at the end of the day, if you're not happy with the circle of relationships around you, what's it worth, Yeah. So anyway.
I agree. Yeah, that's a really good topic for us to talk about, is kind of marriage and relationships and that in business. That my husband just started a new job last week, and he's now back in the office full time, which is a big change for everybody now, right? People aren't out. And so now for the first time in over 2 years, he's gone and he doesn't get home till 6:00 at night. And I remember how I felt years ago when it was like that. And so we're kind of going through that readjustment phase. And I think maybe you guys have felt this over the last 2 years. There's like a new phase of adjustment to a different way of life every few months. And so this is the latest adjustment. And I think that that's where prioritizing comes in. And like, I don't see him as, it's finding that time is,
exactly. It's hard.
And then I make him work for me at night, not make him. He says he wants to, but not really. He's up late editing stuff like this because anyway, I'm curious how you guys were talking about, Chris, you just mentioned client load, and I'm curious how you have kept the relationships in check and given people the right amount of attention when they need it, and prioritize, not that one client's more important than the other, but when you have a lot of people vying for your attention, how do you figure out where that energy goes, who you're talking to? I mean, I'm sure that a lot of it is scheduled calls, but there has to be more beyond that.
Yeah. For lack of maybe a better plan or strategically, this has just been great. We can't tell yet exactly. We've intentionally set up our relationship with our one-on-one clients in such a way that, yes, we have fixed times together. I mean, that's just relevant and appropriate for us to schedule and commit to. But Chris and I have been really intentional about the number of clients that we work with so that we can create a lot of open space for them. And so we use the term ad hoc, but a lot of the value that we bring in our relationship with our one-on-one clients is that we're really trying to engage with them on the ground in terms of how do you actually execute and create processes and systems that are sustainable, which means it's not just telling them and talking at them. There's a lot more engagement. And that requires us to be available in the moment. Like, I'm sitting down and having this kind of conversation with these people tomorrow. Here's why. Do you have any input? So we have left ourselves very available for ad hoc engagement with our clients. But we're always very honest with them at the beginning of, hey, if we're not with another client, or if we're not in kind of those family hours, we're going to do everything we can to respond immediately to you and provide you the value and resources that you need. If we don't respond, we're in one of those two positions, either with another client, giving them the attention they require, or we're with our families. And we have yet to have anybody ever disrespect that.
Yeah, nobody's abused it. I will say I did take a call one time while I was on the toilet on a Sunday morning. after my full pot of coffee, I was sitting on the toilet. Well, hey, there's so-and-so. Okay. Hey, how's it going? And I'm not
was
joking.
It all echoey?
I'm not, probably.
I know, and you could tell, and you're like,
you're like, wait a minute, are you in the bathroom?
We had a client on a Zoom call, and all of a sudden his video went off, and then I hear this tinkling sound. I'm like, oh my gosh, he forgot to turn his mic off. This is hilarious. No,
that's
but
dedication.
I'm not kidding though. This client called on a Sunday morning, and his question was, it was a perfectly good question, actually, was, hey, Chris, how do you decompress, and like, how do you use your Sundays? And they were really just struggling, like, God, how do I like recharge? That's a really good question. And frankly, something we end up talking with our clients about periodically is, how do you do that as a restoration operator when it just seems like it's a 24/7 constant thing you always have to be on? But it was just so ironic. I'm literally sitting there on the toilet after having my morning coffee. But that is what we offer our clients. And it is, from what we understand.
I mean, don't hyper focus on the toilet.
No,
that, like, that's not what we're saying we're offering our clients.
But. That's not the extent of it. But but it is tricky. It is not, we just, like Brandon said, our clients have been really respectful of it, but it does limit. It's not very scalable in the sense that we can only take on so many clients at a time and provide them that access. The direction we're moving now is we've kind of been looking strategically at that issue since really last year. almost since we began.
Yeah.
We began with this idea in mind of we want to be able to work directly in a really high contact, high touch relationship with folks, but then create some other platforms where we can still help people out on more of a scalable fashion. And of course, that's when people start to get into online course stuff and, more scaled kind of interactions. And so I think that's going to allow us to continue growing our impact and our influence, while still being able to maintain that kind of high touch relationship. So we'll see. It's a growing edge for us. And I think all consultants in our market are trying to figure out that balance of how much one-on-one work can we do and how much of it needs to be more scaled and, packaged into digital solutions, that people can consume without us there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Balancing act for certain.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things you do tell your clients on how to decompress? That is hard. This industry breeds so much burnout and exhaustion So what do you?
I'll start with one, and I know Brandon's probably got some ideas. I almost taught this at the offsite sales event thing that we did on the East Coast a couple of weeks ago, and I held back because I was a little bit ginger. I was like, oh, maybe they'll think I'm weird. But one of the things that I've taught,
podcast is getting weird. We've talked about toilets.
I know.
Yeah,
I think I even said sex at one point. Yeah.
We've already crossed all the.
Yeah, we are.
Lines.
It's a different show this time. So I like to teach this, and I've taught this to techs. I've taught this to GMs. I've taught this to project managers, and I call it the body inventory. And listen, I'm no yoga guru. I'm not like a meditation, whatever guy necessarily, but I have found certain mindfulness practices to be really useful in our business. And I first started doing this body inventory back when I was VP of sales at our first company. And when I was out on the road, I would use this as kind of a reset. Like, because when you're running and gunning, building like we were growing like crazy. Both team wise and revenue wise, for a big stretch there. And it was intense, and I love intense. Like I'm wired for intense, but I needed a way to reset. And so I would sit in my car and I would do a simple mindfulness meditation where I just literally close my eyes and I start at the top of my head, and I'm just trying to feel the weight of my head on my shoulders. And I just progress through my body. I won't lead you guys through this, but if you just Google body inventory, mindfulness exercise on YouTube, you'll see examples of this, but it's really just drawing your awareness back to your body instead of the crazy torrent of thoughts and stories and concepts that are always rattling through your head. It just helps bring some peace to that moment. And it's amazing what just a 3 or 4 minute meditation in the cab of your truck will do. And I have this funny story. I was coaching a general manager of a smaller restoration company on the East Coast. And he was just talking about the stress right at the beginning of our call. And I'm like, all right, listen, can we try something funny? Will you try it with me? And so literally on the Zoom, we did one of these body inventories together. And when he opened his eyes, he was like, I feel better. I was like, okay, right on. And we went on to have a great session. Now, what's even more funny is the following week when I called this coaching client, he said, hey, I got to tell you a story. And he told me about how his tech came in later that day after his session and was totally burnout, stressed out. And this was his lead water mitigation tech. And so he literally brought him in the office and said, close the door. Let's do this thing that my coach just taught me. And he walked him through the body inventory, and it became a thing for them where they could kind of hit reset when they're having a crazy day. And sometimes they would do it on an after hours thing when they got hammered with a bunch of after hours calls or whatever. They would actually sit in the cab of the truck together. I'm like, this is cool, but it works anyway. So that's one of the ways I do it. It's just some of those little simple mindfulness type of deals.
Yeah, that's a good one. I might turn it a little bit slightly different direction. I think where my mind goes first is almost to a different way of problem solving. So instead of just finding decompression, I think the first place I like to go is try to identify for someone on a ROI level, like return on investment, what would gain them the most margin back? So what problem can we focus on together and solve in the shortest time period possible? Because it's going to give you as more energy, more bandwidth. It's kind of like we teach people. It's, we can unload information on people and then they just become inundated with all the shoulda, coulda, and yes, I need to do this and this needs to get better.
Yep.
That doesn't help anybody. But if you can treat it almost like paying off debt, right? It's like, just focus all your energy on one card. That card's gone. Now you've got more resources to plant on the second card. Anyways, I think it's less about me teaching people how to decompress. And I just try to prioritize reminding people, let's just solve one problem at a time. And let's prioritize that problem by identifying what will give you the biggest return for your investment. And I think that's pretty helpful. I don't know if it helps anybody decompress though.
I like that. I'm thinking about in my life, what return on investment now. I like it. Okay. So one of the things that I have always really liked about both of you is you are majorly authentic, and the stuff that you talk about in your podcast and in your columns are maybe different topics than what you're maybe used to hearing about in business development type conversations, right? So you've talked about anger and regret and humility in sales and those kinds of things. And so I don't even know which topic I want to start on. I guess I want to talk about regret and what you guys have learned from regrets in your life and how you've learned to harness that regret for good instead of keeping those regrets and letting them detract from the direction you're going.
That's a solid question. That's a bit of Pandora's box, probably.
Yeah. Well, probably the most transformational, I guess, change in my life for the last 5 years is really embracing that regret piece. Because to me, like, regret and reflection are kind of one and the same, right? It's like, okay, what I think for whatever reason, right, we tend to have a harder time to diagnose our success, like reflecting on a success that we had, because I'm a believer that there's always an element of luck in our success, right? Time, right place. We put in the effort to get there, but then there's this other component that we can't always pinpoint why we won in that situation, why we lost. Sometimes it's a lot easier to tell where we lost. Like, we can analyze our behavior and say, oh, I skipped that step, or I didn't do enough due diligence before going into that conversation, and I totally missed what they were needing or wanting or whatever. It's easier to diagnose and analyze the failures. And I think that the first sort of reaction we have typically is regret or shame. Is this the worst, when we're just like, oh man, I'm not enough, or we start to get into that space. But for me, just leaning into that reflection on what went wrong here and why, like what was happening inside me, and trying to think a level deeper besides just process. Like, okay, what was happening inside me that made me react that way in that situation, or treat that person that way, or say it that way? What was going on for me? That's been probably the biggest fundamental change in my life, is just, I have much more frequent bouts of that, of, hey, what's not working right now? And why is that? Where's that coming from? What is the story inside my head that's causing me to think this way about that person or that situation or my performance and during that session? I say performance. I think consultants will know what I mean, right? Because you really have to be on, when you're working with these clients. And so sometimes it feels like a performance, because I've got an objective. I've got something I need to communicate or find out or understand, all that kind of whatever. And so just creating that regular pause. And for me, that's one of the ways I decompress is Sunday mornings for me. Our family, we go to church. We don't go to church until the evening on Sundays, which I love, because in the morning, that's my coffee time, is Sunday morning. It's not even my wife and I's time. It's me. I sit out on our back deck and I'm reflecting on, okay, what's going well, what is not going well, and what's that about? And how can I make that different? What am I in control of here? What could I change to create a different experience, a different outcome next time? That's kind of how I've been thinking about regret. For me, it's more of a reflection, almost like a personal after action review.
I'd say I'd lean probably harder on that. I can't remember where I picked this up, but probably 2 or 3 years ago, there was somebody, it was either a podcast or something, I don't know, where the person was just talking about their ability to reflect on an experience, an event, and do a better job of not assigning good, bad value to it, so that they had the freedom to hang in it long enough that they could learn something from it. Right. So like, as soon as we assign that was bad, then our ego and our self-defense kicks in, and it wants us to get away from that situation as quickly as possible.
Yep.
And, for those close to me, there was an event not that long ago in my life that was complicated and was hard and very teaching in a lot of ways. And it wouldn't have been, though, it would have just been affirming and supportive of self-defense type behavior had I not been spending some time to learn how to not assign good, bad value and hang in something long enough to reflect on it and gain something from it. And so in my mind, I feel like the, kind of Dan Pink's perspective on the power of regret is it can actually be an absolute superpower if you get good at sitting in something long enough to reflect on it, to ask yourself hard questions and identify, regardless, good, bad, or indifferent, what could I take from this? And is it something that I can apply positive change in my life with? And it sounds so heady, like we just sit around and contemplate the cosmos. It's not, but that's been really powerful for me, man, because I'm 45 and I feel like I'm maturing at a rate right now that's nowhere near any time in my youth. Like it's just, and a lot of it is just because I'm not so hard on myself when I'm reflecting on a situation, an experience, whether it was good, bad, what happened. After action review, if you can adopt that as like a personal development, personal exercise, oh my gosh. And then it teaches you to mirror it for your teams. Can you imagine if we had an entire team of people that were really good at just reflecting on performance, experience, interaction with peers, clients. And because it wasn't this heavy, weighty, condemning thing, imagine that creates an learning environment. Like if our teams were constantly learning, constantly developing on their own because they were motivated by it, because they could reflect without guilt. Wow. Like I'm not even like, if you could bottle that, you'd be a gazillionaire. Anyways, that's what I've been trying to do. And that's, I think, where regret kind of falls in line for me.
I think in our, and this is not exclusive to restoration, but just, I think in the trades, it's such a physical, it's such a physical industry, right? It requires hard work, stick-to-itiveness. It requires perseverance, regardless of how we feel, right? So I think in general, and it's not even like a cultural thing I think anybody's led per se. It's just that it's one of those things where we just have to soldier on in this industry a lot. And we learn just subconsciously to suppress what's happening internally. It's just, we have an objective in front of us. We got to do it. And so I think the attitude that can take over for a lot of owners and entrepreneurs and leaders is, F it, just keep moving. Screw it. Just move along. Oh, you can't handle, you didn't like the way I said that. Well, then get out. If you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen. We can get into this sort of machismo, disregard the emotion, the relational aspect of things. And yet when we can step back and really understand ourselves, I think then it gives us the opportunity to change to change the outcome next time, to where that thing that doesn't happen as often, because we're changing the way that we're interacting with our team and whatnot. Some people manage to be really successful, never looking internally, never doing self-work. And it's like, I don't know how they do it, but for me, it's just been an important part of my path. Like I just function better when I'm able to spend some time in that zone regularly.
Yeah, I agree.
I like this conversation a lot about emotions and like taking time to sit with it and figure out what it really is and where it should be placed. And then also the idea of we've buried it, right? That's kind of a generational gap too, right? Like probably a lot of us grew up of like,
oh, you're right.
Feel your feelings, bury them. But I think something that I've struggled with our society now though, is we've also said it's okay to feel whatever you're feeling right in this moment.
Yes.
And it's like, wait, you need to explore that for a minute. You don't just get to like, yes, that is a thing for me.
Oh man, I think that's huge. We were talking about this not that long ago. I'm brain spasming the word. So there's transparency, and then there's what's the other? We've talked about it so much.
There's transparency and there's oversharing.
Yeah,
it's
like this idea of being consistent with core beliefs, values, making sure that you're making decisions that align with this is our culture, this is what we've said. But then there's clearly lots of times as key leaders or influencers, you can't just wear everything on your sleeve.
No.
So you can't be transparent all the time, but I think we can always remain committed to being aligned with our values and our decision-making processes. But yeah, you can't. I mean, we got to have filters. You can't, you know.
And you can't just be, I don't know. I don't think that you get to just tell somebody, well, if you're feeling angry right in this moment, you just sit in that and you feel that. It's like, well, but you might need to move through that and figure out what, you can't just leave it at that anger. And, then we get bitterness and a whole bunch of other problems that come from that.
Oh man. Yeah.
That's
no
a big
doubt.
road we go down. We don't have to go down that road. But all right.
Well, and there's a great book out there called The Power of Now and a New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. Kind of new agey, a little bit hard for some people to digest, but a really, really good book. But he just talks about how 90% of the thoughts that our mind generates are rubbish and repetitive. And if you just if you just kind of tune in to notice, what am I thinking about? Most of us have some nagging stories in our head about an interaction we had earlier in the day, or could be our relationship with our spouse. We have these narratives that we kind of carry throughout the day that 90% of the time they're just rubbish. And so if we're not aware of that, we can spin out and react with our people, with our friends, with our family, and there was no real fact basis, or we aren't taking time to even investigate. Is this thought or response I had to that situation even grounded in truth? Right? Or am I making all kinds of assumptions about that person's intention and what their motivation was? And 90% of the time we don't have real data, and we're flipping out and reacting to a situation that's a lot of it like the story has been spun around and formed in our head. And if we don't get out of that, it totally fractures our leadership. People don't feel safe around us. Right.
Yep.
So, yeah, boy.
Okay. So you've touched on this quite a bit actually throughout our conversation, but now that you're consultants and you are viewed as leaders, you also have to keep growing. You also have to keep learning more and more. And you guys dive into a lot, podcasts and books and all that. So what are some of your favorite resources right now for personal and professional growth?
Gosh, that's a good question. I think at the end of the day, podcasts, what an amazing tool that we all have access to. And that's not a pitch for, anything specific, but gosh, there's just brilliant people who are masters of being curious and interviewing people and giving us all access to so much information. It's unbelievable. So I think I in my mind, there is no reason that someone shouldn't be consuming 1, 3, 10, pretty specific podcasts on a regular basis, just because there's so much rich information coming in to shape your mind. So for me, that's a big priority. I think the other thing is I need to read pages more, but again, for fighting for time, I'm a huge Audible guy. I just try to consume any driving that I'm doing. I tend to listen to books, and I think that continues to be a really rad resource for me. And I'm trying to spend more time reading or listening, if you will, to books around not just self-development for the sake of self-development, but more kind of fixated on understanding self and the ability to influence others better, not for manipulation, but so I didn't come up with this theory, but there's this idea basically that really great leaders are the kind of people that have shrank the gap between what they intended to communicate and what their audience receives, right? Like the real gifted leaders are the ones that have just developed the skill set where what they intend to transfer knowledge wise to their recipient, they've flexed their communication style. They do whatever is necessary. to unhinder that person's ability to hear and provide input. So in my mind, I'm trying to stay in that zone. Like for me, the leaders that I admire are good at that. And I'm trying to gain in that skill set, because I cannot tell you for how much of my career as a leader, I love developing other leaders. It's like what I geek out on, but it was never exactly what I wanted. It was never quite to the extent that I hoped, or the level that I saw in my mind. And 99% of the time, that was because there was gaps in my ability to effectively communicate what I was intending and what my audience picked up on. And so anyways, I'm just trying to develop that. And so anything books wise related to that, that's where I've been.
Yeah. And I would certainly echo that. I mean, I think podcasts, I was just talking with the owner of my gym this morning. We were having a little side chat, and I had recommended a podcast to him recently. He's like, "Oh man, that was really good." And I think, if 10 years ago we'd had access to the breadth of podcasts that we have now, I mean, I just wonder where I would be with all the knowledge and learning and just the perspective, how much broader our perspective can be, particularly us as restorers and in this industry. When we open ourselves up to what's happening outside of our industry, there's just so much to learn from other industry verticals. One of the podcasts I've really gotten hooked on lately is called Business Breakdowns.
Oh yeah.
And it's a couple of these MBA type Wall Street guys that every single episode, they break down a different business. Like they did one on the Peloton bike company. There was one on the John Deere brand of companies. They cross all different kinds of industries. There's some tech and online companies, all of them. And it is so fascinating to hear an MBA type person. I don't have an MBA. I'm learning new things all the time, different business terms and KPIs and the way investors look at a business. I'm hearing all these different angles. It's very interesting to me. And I think I just always want to be challenging myself. And I think as leaders, we have to be pushing ourselves as much or more than we expect or desire our team to push themselves, right? It's like, I have to be the model. I at least first have to be the model so that my downline leaders have somebody to pace off of, right? And then as they lead and they model for their team, right, then their team is pacing off of them, and the same thing is true of my kids, right? If like I need to model what it looks like to always be learning and challenging myself to my children. Anyway, so Business Breakdowns, I love that podcast, highly recommend it. I think the other sort of growing edge for me, I think a lot about alignment. Like between what I say about myself and what I believe is important behaviors in a business and the things that we tell our clients to do.
Yep.
It's a very sobering place and this is part of my Sunday. This is part of my reflection on Sundays is, okay, where am I out of alignment? Where am I saying something about myself or telling other people to behave in a certain way? And I'm kind of not, or definitely not living that out consistently. There's a really wonderful book, and I keep coming back to it over the last 10 years. It's called Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute.
Money.
And it is incredibly powerful. And I think about it routinely. And it really is about this idea of alignment. I think it might be the most powerful thing a leader can grow in, period, is recognizing when we are saying or asking something of others that we're not doing or asking of ourselves. There's a really great little fable in the book where the protagonist is talking about his relationship with his wife. And he talks about how when he drives out of his driveway every day to go to work, the newspaper boy, they have a long driveway. The newspaper boy hucks it, but it only gets halfway to their door. And he knows because his wife comments, we all have our thing that irritates us, and his wife is irritated. She has to walk out in her slippers and her feet get wet. And so he knows that she loves it when he brings the newspaper, when he tosses it up to the door for her. And it's just this simple idea that when we know a good thing we ought to do, and this also translates to integrity in the sense of when we've asked other people to do something, there's this moment of truth where when no one's looking, we have the option of not doing it. Yeah. But he talks about in the book, he said, but when I do that, I betray myself. it isn't so much that we've let others down, because others may not ever see or feel that directly,
Yes.
but we betray ourselves. And I think the more often we get in a habit of betraying ourselves, the less trustworthy we become for the people around us. And conversely, it's like, the more conscious I am of those little moments where I'm betraying. Here's one example in our office building. Okay. Sometimes I'm the last one here. Brandon and I are the last one here. And there's a fan and a light in the bathroom at the end of this hallway. We share this building with like 3 other professional counselors. I don't know if that's the universe's way of telling us, Brandon and I, something.
We
but
probably need, yeah.
It's like us restoration consultants. And then there's like PhD psychiatrists and counselors that take up the rest of the building, and a financial advisor downstairs. Anyway, we're the last ones here. And it's just these little things of, at times I'll go to lock the door and I'll hear the fan in the bathroom. I'm like, I should turn off the light in the fan.
Yep.
It's such a little thing. But if I'm the landlord, I don't want people leaving the fan and the light on all night, because that's what, another $50 over the month of power bill, whatever. Right. So I know this seems like navel gazing, but it is not. It is not navel gazing. Leaving the newspaper on the driveway when you know that simple physical, like, I'm going to burn 4 calories to open my door and throw the paper up to the door for my wife. When I choose to just ignore that impulse or that instinct, I'm betraying myself in little ways. And I trust myself less in the moments when it really matters for me to make the right choice, the hard choice. And I just, man, that concept, it touched me in so many different ways. And I've talked about it a little on the podcast. It's made a massive change in my relationship with my wife. But I think it's also spilled over in all kinds of ways in our business.
I've reaped the benefits of that too.
Oh man.
Because he and I are very different, obviously. And my priorities, I mean, core beliefs, of course, we're on point together. It's why we're business partners. But you know, day-to-day priorities can look really different. And Chris has gone out of his way a lot to try to meet me in the things that I prioritize as an 8 versus him, and vice versa, I think. So yeah, I would second that. That's been pretty influential in your life. And it made you really fortunate, because now you get to hang out with me just because you're doing it. So that's good. You got that dialed in.
That's right.
Yeah. Just in case anybody missed that.
Yes. Yeah. Poked. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, anything else that you guys want to add? I want to make sure that people who are listening to this, be sure to check out the Head, Heart, and Boots podcast. And Chris just had an article in the March-April issue of CNR that I've gotten good feedback on. And Brandon, both of them write consistently for our monthly newsletter. So they write for the 3rd Tuesday of every month, I believe. So be sure to check all of that out. You can find their column on cnrmagazine.com, and you can find their podcast around and on their website. floodlightgrp.com, right? Floodlight.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Kind of our new baby at the moment is, we just got so many requests. I know you're hearing a lot of this chatter in the industry too, around commercial sales.
Yep.
Like, it's a tough nut to crack, and our industry doesn't have a ton of time. And obviously the big players, you know, the Belfors and the ATIs and so forth, have camped out in that part of the market. But I think the whole industry is learning, how do we sell to commercial, you know, because we've spent so much of our life growing up in the industry on the route sales side, really catering to insurance agents. And of course, all of that has been upended over the last few years. Mm-hmm. And so people have been looking for resources, and it's a lot of the work that Brandon and I end up doing in our one-on-one consulting, but again, it's not scalable. And so we've got our commercial sales master course. We've really tried to create an asynchronous way, right? Where it doesn't require you to go travel to a workshop. It doesn't require you to log in at a set time and mm-hmm. give up part of your week, but people can sort of do it at their own pace. Mm-hmm. Option for really in-depth commercial sales training. And then the other piece is the sales circles, which is actually a live interaction with Brandon and I and the Floodlight team. Every 2 weeks, it's a turnkey cohort mastermind group, groups of 10 non-competing, businesses for sales leaders in particular. So it creates a supportive and competitive environment for sales leaders, which our industry just hasn't had. Mm-hmm. And Brandon and I had kind of a vision for that from the jump. And then one of our clients started pushing on us, and we started to hear from people like, commercial sales. I'm like, okay, now's the time.
I love it. Well, we'll have to catch up again soon. I always enjoy chatting with both of you. Thank you for all that you do and all of the introductions you've given me. I appreciate that. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and your week.
Right on. Thanks
Hey,
for having us.
Thanks a lot, Michelle. See you later.
We'll see you.
For more Restoration Today, visit our website, cnrmagazine.com, or find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts.